welcome back to another potluck wrap up. This is where I stick every title that I have read in the previous month into this teapot and then pull them out at random, meaning there are a lot more titles in here that I've just got to remember. I've just got to hope that even though I read them last year, I still remember the plot. I always give myself 20 minutes because I do have a tendency to ramble on. And I'll be honest, March was a strong reading month. I think I read between like 10 and 12 books in March, which is almost double what I read in January. And if I can keep up that trajectory, I'm going to smash my 67 books and finally hit 1,000 books read this year. Easy. Easy peasy. So with that in mind, let's start wrapping up some of the great books that I read this month. There were some 1 stars, there were some DNFs that we won't go into, but there were also some great 5 stars. So hopefully I get to tell you about some of the 5 stars I read this month. Okay, the first one is definitely from this month because I chucked one of these bits of paper in earlier today. So this is going to be, oh my god, starting strong with a 5-star read. Let's talk about Camp Damascus. Now, Chuck Tingle has written several weird erotica books, and that was what they were known for. That was their brand, was weird, Amazon-only porn. Did anyone expect them to write a horror book? No. Although those books I'm sure are horrifying. Is it good? Yes. Oh my god, so good. So good. So I went into this nervous. This was originally a Lunar Library pick. And when I started it, the writing was clearly strong. Like clearly a really strong writing style. But very, very religious. Very religious. And to the point that it was a little bit scary. And then I read on and I realised that was the point. So when I first read it, I was kind of nervous because I am not particularly religious myself. I grew up with very religious people, but not American level scary religious. This is American level, small town, built around a church and a cult and a conversion therapy camp, which is what Camp Damascus is. Terrifying. And I found it really bizarre at the beginning because the main character has this real juvenile quality to her. She admits that she's 20 years old, but she doesn't have a door on her room, and her parents micromanage a lot of her stuff. And she's looking to go to college, but she's like 20 years old, and she's like behind, etc. And later on, you realise those are all setups. Those are all things that are there for a reason. She is an LGBT neurodiverse main character. We love to see it. That is obviously a key element in this. And this is a very pro-LGBT, anti-conversion therapy horror. And it's so cleverly crafted. The scary shit is legitimately insidious, like genuinely edge of my seat scary. One of the creepiest horrors I've ever read. Loved it. Genuinely couldn't put it down. Got to the point where I was in like the last 150 pages and my work was going to suffer because I just wanted to keep picking up this book that I thought, I'm just going to take an afternoon to finish it because if I don't, I'm going to think about this all week and not actually get my work done. So I had to proactively read it. You know what I'm saying? Had to get it done. Had to finish it. Oh my god, it was so good. It was so good. The side characters are incredible. I really like the way they're all built up. The parents, don't go into this if you have a loving relationship with your parents. You're more likely to be triggered if you don't have a loving relationship with your parents, but the parents are legit scary. They're legit scary in this. There was so many things that were really subtly insidious and then like almost like a jump scare would fuck you up. Oh my god, it was so good. It was so good. So yeah, if you've got any interest in horror whatsoever, or if you really liked The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, 10 out of 10. This will be in one of my best books of the year video, for sure. Because it's so good. It's so good. And I will think about it till the day I die. This is such a crazy book. It's got great pacing, great characters, great plot. Satisfying ending. It's so good. It's so good. So don't let the religion put you off. That's the whole point. If you are super religious, maybe it's not for you, but don't let the religion put you off because I nearly did and I'd have regretted it. Genuinely harrowing. Okay, next. Another one from this month. Need to mix these up a little bit. Oh, another 5 stars. Another 5 stars, and a chunky one, right? So I TBR'd this. I can't even remember what prompt this was for. I think it was fantasy mood read, because I had recently reread Lies of Locke Lamora because I really wanted to get the 10th anniversary canvas editions, and I was like, I'm not getting them until I've reread them, because if they don't hold up, then there's no point. Now, originally, I gave this 3 stars, and I don't know what planet I was on, because this book is so good. This book, okay, so Lies of Locke Lamora, this is book 2. Lies of Locke Lamora is about a group called the Gentleman Bastards. They are thieves. They like to steal from the rich, but they get caught up in a conspiracy and super dramatic stuff happens. And I cried because I loved characters that had terrible things happen to them. And in book 2, you follow what remains of that group getting caught up in more conspiracy and then being forced to learn to be pirates and going out to sea. And again, super traumatic, super fantastic. Loved it. I need more pirate fantasy recs like this, because I feel like I've been recommended pirate books before. I really enjoyed the first Vampirates book. I didn't massively love Pirates by Celia Reese, which is one of like the cult classic pirate books, and I don't really like YA fantasy pirates. High fantasy, adult pirates with adult shit going on, and like the sheer amount of research Scott Lynch must have done, because it's all larboard and starboard, and he's talking ropes, and he's talking brig, and he's talking about different... Oh my god, it was so clever, so well researched. Loved the characters. It was so much fun. Brutal ending as always. Genuinely nervous to reread the 3rd one now, because it's going to be expensive, because I am going to need to replace them and get the canvas copies, because they're so good. They're so good. So yeah, that was another 5 stars. It was another 5 stars. I was listening to it and reading along whilst working. I'll be honest, I had a great reading month. Productivity did take a nosedive. Right, let's try and pick something from a little bit further back. Let's go for something that's not one of those big ones. Doesn't matter, still from March, it's just a different bit of paper. We have 3 Fires by Denise Mina. Now this still got, I think, either 4.5 or 4 stars and rounded up to 5. But I'll be honest, I did not love this the way I loved Rizzio. Rizzio had me by the throat the entire time I was reading this. This is another one where the religion was religioning. And basically this follows a man called Savonarola, who is the reason that the Florence fires, the fires of the Vanities, burning of the Vanities happened. He basically becomes a tyrant when he doesn't get his own way, and becomes a very penitent monk who basically just hates fun and hates things that make people happy and hates the gays and hates everything. Hates, lives to hate, and basically ransacks Florence with his hatred, and then gets the most brutal comeuppance. And I think the reason I didn't love this as much as I enjoyed Rizzio is not about the writing style. The writing style is still powerful and clever and just very, oh my god, just so beautifully crafted, but harrowing. I think it's because Rizzio takes place over one night. So everything happens very, very quickly. Whereas in this one, we almost kind of have these little vignettes of things that happen to him. And because it takes longer to get there, it feels like it takes longer to get there. And it starts where you know it's going to end terribly. And it ends terribly. And it's brutal. But then Venice and Florence were in those eras. So I don't really know what I was expecting, to be honest. But Denise Mina once again ruined me. Didn't ruin me as thoroughly as Rizzio did. But I think enjoy is the wrong word. It was an experience. I experienced 3 Fires. And if you like super dark, realistic historical fiction that is going to leave you a husk of a human being, feel free to give it a go. Okay. I'm going to look in this time because I'm going to aim for something that's not March-based. I pulled 2 because of course I did. Of course I did. So the first one is from August of last year. I read The Darkening. Now, I've borrowed Lizzie's copy because I've actually unhauled my copy. I really, really enjoyed this. I just didn't feel like I wanted to keep it. I didn't love it. I gave it 3.5 to 4 stars. This had real Shadow and Bone vibes. The things that recommend it are the fact that there is a really interesting dynamic between the characters. There's an almost love triangle, but it's not fully committed to. Romance does not take a prevalent theme, at least in the first one. There are romantic ties, but there's more going on than that. It also has a Own Voices BIPOC author, and it is based on Islamic mythology, I believe. But essentially you have this main character who really wants to learn magic. Her father is magic, and there is this black cloud of dark magic that is creeping ever closer to her city. And when people get caught up in this storm, terrible things happen to them. They don't either return, or they do, they have some kind of curse put upon them. Now, she was able to go in, or her mother went in, and she was touched by it. So she has some kind of dark magic curse, but not in the same way. Anyway, her father gets discovered as someone who's using magic and basically is arrested. She goes undercover to try and save him and gets caught up in trying to subvert the expectations of the royal family and bring down this empire. It had a lot going on, and I think that was part of the problem for me, is there was just a lot going on. And because this is only a duology, I've still got The Light Struck still to read. It was almost too much for one book to carry, and I kind of feel like I wanted more time getting to know the characters rather than her. This felt like it could have been a standalone, but there was just so much going on. Like, it was written like it was going to be a standalone, but then there was still just too much going on. So I found that kind of difficult to deal with. It is by Hodder, so I will always recommend a Hodder book. I feel like even just as intro to YA fantasy, they're a great place to start. They're a great publisher. They are now Hodderscape. Would 10 out of 10 recommend all of their books, because I think at the end of the day, they've got such a great grasp on high fantasy YA, and they actively represent Own Voices authors, LGBT, BIPOC, and I believe they have a few neurodivergent authors as well. So we'll always recommend them, but this one just didn't hit it for me because it was trying to do too much. But then maybe I'm just being super harsh. Maybe it was just the fact that it reminded me so much of Shadow and Bone, and Shadow and Bone was barely a 3 stars for me. If you like Shadow and Bone though, give it a go. Who knows? Maybe you'll like it more than I did. I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if you enjoyed it more than I did. But as you can see, I like to be fully traumatized, not just passively traumatized. You've got to hurt my soul for me to give you 5 stars. And then the other one is from July, Home I'm Darling. So I read this shortly before Lizzie acted in the season preview for the local theatre company that is running Home I'm Darling, coming up super soon actually. So like, this is hilarious that I'm recommending this now, because tickets have finally gone on sale for this. But I wanted to read it because I knew Lizzie and Zach were learning lines for it, and I wanted to kind of know the wider context of those scenes, and I really enjoyed it. I gave this 4 stars. So Laura Wade is the same author who wrote Posh, which was the play that was then turned into the film The Riot Club. So it is very sharp. Her understanding of the human psychology is very, very on point. The way she writes dialogue is very realistic. And basically the premise of this is, you have Judy, who is this classic 50s housewife, except it's not the 1950s, and she is struggling financially. Her husband is pitted to get a promotion, and when he's passed over, their money troubles just get worse. And the beautiful facade of 50s life she has created for herself fractures. And there is a really, really well crafted and great monologue in this from her mother, who experienced the 50s as they truly were, not the sanitized movie Hollywood style 50s, but what the real 50s were, what they looked like, etc. And she just can't fathom that her daughter would want to do that, because she became like an active feminist in revolt to this. But it's a really, really interesting play. It's got a really interesting dynamic between all the individual characters. There are themes for mentioned sexual assault, which is just to be wary of, but it is very openly feminist, which I loved. Very clever, very funny, and really well crafted. So I can't wait to see the actual thing. I am helping in the fact that I'm going to be prompt for this play, so I will get to see it several times, and I will be sat there with this copy, sat there reading lines, so that should the actors stumble, I'm there to support them, which is really exciting because I've never done that before. But yeah, so I'm really glad that I got to talk about this now, because literally tickets are available. So if you're in Oxfordshire or Warwickshire near Banbury, come and watch this. I'll leave the links down below, because yeah, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to come and see this? Next, another slightly old one, but that's good. The Last Hero from September. So this was the penultimate book in the Terry Pratchett series that I was reading. I think I've already talked about the Academicals, which is the final in the Rincewind series. Now, I didn't love this. It's a novella for a start, so a lot of things happen very, very quickly, which I struggled with. Visually, it's stunning, but of all the Rincewind series, the characters I care about the least are the Barbarians and Rincewind. So the fact that this novel or novella actively focuses on them was just kind of boring. It was playing out a lot of tropes. It still had its classic Terry Pratchett subversions. This just wasn't my favourite. And I think also, I can see why loads of people say don't start your Colour of Magic series or Discworld series with the Rincewind series. But I'm glad I've ticked it off because it is my least favourite of them, but I've still found so much joy in these books. The audiobook for this one, though, is so old and so grainy that I do think that also added to not enjoying it because I was reading it along and listening to it. But it was fine. It wasn't my favourite. I'm going to go back to Terry Pratchett with more vim next time, though, because I'm starting the Witches series, which is going to be a good time. I think I have time for maybe one or two more. I'm going to pick this one because I kind of saw what it was. So we have another one from March, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. This is a non-fiction about racism by Rennie Edo-Lodge, who was a literature student who then became a kind of journalistic commentator on how race is projected in media, etc. And she's kind of become almost like a pundit for racism, which is kind of wild. But what I really liked about this is a lot of the books I've read about racism by BIPOC authors have been very American-centric, whereas this one is British and kind of focuses on racism in Britain. So it is a uncomfortable read. It's supposed to be an uncomfortable read, but it challenges things that I have seen in my day-to-day life, as opposed to something that is a bit more detached, like the US versions of books like this, such as Hood Feminism, and even to a certain extent Superior, which is, she is British, BIPOC British, but it still carries, it still looks at a variety of different areas and racism as opposed to specifically British. So I found that really interesting. I thought the writing style of this was very informative, it was very thorough, but it was also quite anecdotal as well, in the fact that there are things in this that she's had to deal with. I mean, the whole premise of this is that Edo-Lodge is sick of explaining to white people why racism is bad, which, just saying that out loud feels exhausting, especially because when they discuss racism with white people, it becomes an almost defense mechanism for them to try and shut down that conversation, because they couldn't possibly be racist, ignoring the fact that acknowledging white privilege is a step in anti-racism, as opposed to just ignoring it and pretending colours don't exist. And I really there is a chapter specifically on ignoring colour and why that's detrimental to it, as opposed to, in the same way that the hashtag All Lives Matter was detrimental to hashtag Black Lives Matter, because it doesn't centre the BIPOC, and specifically in this instance black people, having the conversation. It centres around white guilt about not wanting to acknowledge your own privilege. So I found that really interesting and really fascinating. I'm really glad I finally prioritised this for March. I did say I was going to read it in March, and I did. I'm really glad I did. But yeah, really interesting and informative read. Would recommend, especially if you're a fan of Roxane Gay, Mickey Kendall and Angela Saini. Okay, I'm going to squeeze one more in. Technically, I've got 30 seconds, but I'm going to squeeze one more in. So, in December, I read You Had Me at Ola, which is the first in the Alexis Daria romances. This is basically two Latinx actors getting their final chance to kind of hit stardom, but a romance develops between the two of them. They're both coming from very different places, and then it has the classic miscommunication trope. There isn't really a lot for me to say about this book. It is very, very tropey. It is very, very predictable. It's a good time. I enjoyed it enough that I'm keeping A Lot Like Adios, which is the sequel, and also because A Lot Like Adios follows the friend storyline that I really liked in this book. She was kind of my favourite, so I'm going to read that one, and if I don't love that one, then I'm not committing to the full trilogy, because I don't think I care about the third character. That is what it is. They do kind of remind me, and I hate that I'm making this comparison, they do kind of remind me of a Latinx Feyre, Nesta, and Elaine. And it's going to be in that order. So the Nesta book is essentially coming up next, so I'm vibing with that, but I don't really have a lot to say about this. I really do love, though, Latinx romances. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the telenovela style. I don't know if it's the super dramatic, super passionate sincerity that comes from a Latinx romance, but I just vibe with it. They're just great. So I am willing to commit to more of this, even though it is paint by numbers romance, because I would rather read a paint by numbers Latinx romance than I would a paint by numbers white romance. That just is who I am as a person, I guess. But I really like the plot twists in this. I really like that it was very family centric. I really like that there is this kind of self-worth message throughout as well. But it is a classic miscommunication trope. If they had just had like 2 conversations rather than sex, they would not have had the problems that they had, is all I'm saying. So there we go. A strong wrap up for a strong reading month. A variety of both 5 stars and I think I gave this 2 stars. Maybe 3. Let me know in the comments down below, which book did you enjoy the most in March? Are you more likely to read one of these now that you know what my thoughts on them are? If you just want to leave an emoji, feel free to leave a little flame emoji just to let me know that you are here. Treat yourself from something from Waypoint because it supports me and my content. Check out my links below because I now have a Patreon. And most importantly, have a nice day.